Hi, my name is Blavel Nadeem and I'm recording this TED Talk video to talk about an issue that me as a Canadian citizen and you, the audience, should definitely need to hear about. This topic is the racial profiling of young men, especially the black youth, indigenous people, and other minority groups of color such as Latinos, Arabs, etc., that are actually racially profiled and shown extra aggression from our very own police officers. Now, this problem exists a lot in the US, but also within Canada. Now, I'm going to talk about how the criminal justice system actually sentences different individuals. As seen in the Alice Goffman reading, she says that the criminal justice system actually looks at the background of each individual that they decide to sentence. So now, for example, if you have the white male and a black male and they both commit the same level of crime, the same level of severity, what we often find is that their level of punishment is not the same. Usually the white male gets a lesser sentence because he's more educated, he has a higher income, and usually has a higher socioeconomic status. Whereas the person of color usually has a lesser education, is earning less, or maybe not earning at all because they're unemployed, because they lack the proper resources and opportunities that maybe their counterfeit has, and they are living in a have a lower socioeconomic status. Now, I want to point out that this individual, most of the times, does not have the free will to get out of this system, because the criminal justice system creates this very vicious cycle that once you get into, it's very hard for you to get out. Now, what I mean by this is once you go to jail and once it's time to get out and get back into your community, you are tainted with a criminal record, and it's almost impossible or next to near to get a job if you have a criminal record. And to make it even worse, if your name is Jamal or Trayvon, etc., whereas if your name is Jake or Kyle, you have a much lower chance of getting a callback or opportunities than if you have a white name. Now, some of you may laugh or some of you may think this is funny, but this is an actual thing that is happening within our societies, and it's statistically proven that whiter names will actually get more callbacks for job interviews. So moving on, I want to talk about Forrest Stewart's article and how he describes life on Skid Row in downtown LA. Now, why I'm going to downtown LA and why I chose this specific example is because I can relate this to the carding practices within Toronto. So the whole point of what I'm trying to say is that in the article, basically what happens is that we know that Skid Row is a notorious place for an abundance of homeless people. And when there's homeless people, we know that there's going to be more crime. So what happens is that there is an extra and overwhelming police presence within these communities and areas. This extra surveillance actually creates and actually makes the population there they want to just rebel more because they feel like they're not part of the whole society. They feel that they're this second group, and so their only way to answer to that is that they start to rebel more, and so obviously they start doing more crimes, and then there's more police, then there's more crime, then there's more police. So you see, like, the system keeps going on and on. Now, why I relate this to carding in Canada is basically the same thing. What we saw with carding as it first came out is that there was a huge disproportionality between the demographics that were actually getting ticketed. So what we found was that the Toronto police was ticketing and carding young black males between the ages of 16 to 28 more than any other demographic within our society, which is obviously unfair because not all black men or not all people of color are, suspicious or, criminals. Now, a lot of us are actually privileged enough to never have gone through this because we live in better parts of society, but there are people that face this problem on a regular basis. Now, what happens is that this over policing and this extra practice of carding, targeting only black men or only people of color, what this does is it creates a divide between this population and the rest of the population, and also a divide between this population and the criminal justice system. And within our criminal justice system, they start to have an unfair bias against police officers. The police officers start to basically hate this population, and this population starts to hate the police, and the circle keeps going. Now, I feel like these are some issues that we don't really address as much as we need to. And we think that we living in Canada, we think that we are very multicultural and that there is very little to no racism. However, there is a lot of racism that happens, and there are things like carding which obviously show that there is blatant racism and certain biases that police officers have against certain people in the community that we need to fix. So I'm going to be talking about a very important and very recent case, the shooting of Sami Yatim. Now, this individual was a mentally disturbed individual, and he was a young guy on a bus with a knife. And basically, if you don't know the story, what happened is that the police handled this situation very poorly and ended up killing Sami Yatim. And the court and the society has ruled the police officer that actually fired the shots, he actually went to jail for 6 years because it was unfair. So I want to talk about that problem. That problem is not just that police officer. I feel like that problem is our whole police system. We should be getting more training, and we should be actively seeing that police officers in our society are not showing random racial aggression against these profiles and these certain populations. Because if that happens, what happens is that just the criminal justice system and such minority groups and people of color just start to disconnect and create a divide, and this overall has a problem on the society as a whole. Now, what I think is that some solutions to actually fix this is to get rid of and remove the stigma that we have against such populations, which is that we see that people of color, we see black men, we see, especially in Canada, indigenous men and women and aboriginals are extremely racially profiled, just as black people are in US. I would say Canada has the same issue, but with aboriginal people, which go unnoticed, because we see that majority of our prison systems in Canada house aboriginals. So what I want you to take away from this is that we should remove the stigma that we have between these between what we think about such populations, because not every person of color is obviously a criminal, because if that was true, then our whole city would be in chaos, obviously. But also, we need to address the fact that police officers are being extremely aggressive and are just overall not doing the best job that they can be doing. I don't want to criticize them in them doing their jobs, but over the recent years, we definitely have seen a turn in policing where it's gone to a very aggressive and almost tribal feeling, where it just comes down to one team versus another team, like the good guy versus the bad guy. And we need to consider how we deal with such people, and we also need to, as a criminal justice system, make changes about who gets into the criminal justice system, how much time they get punished, what level of crime they did, and is it proportional to their punishment and how much they get sentenced. And also reintegrating back into society. If we're not giving them proper opportunities to actually come back and make a living of themselves and get proper jobs, how do we expect them to, raise their kids or feed themselves if they're not able to get jobs? Like, the only thing they are going to do is get into crime. So overall, I feel like the racial profiling of young black men, indigenous men, and other minority groups of color definitely are racialized, racially profiled by the police and shown extra aggression against, as compared to the counterfeit, which is the white man. And that is all. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.